Hello, it's me Lyric. I'm here in my hoop house to talk about tomato plant care. We're also going to go out into the garden and talk about pepper care. If you were at our market on Friday, July 3rd, you probably saw me giving out tomato and pepper plants. So I want to equip you with the information you need to grow these plants successfully and to have an abundant harvest. The first thing that comes to mind when I think about tomatoes is sun. Tomatoes want a lot of sunlight in order to ripen their fruits. So you want to plant your tomato in as sunny of a location as possible. If you don't have a porch or a yard, if you don't have an outdoor space, you could try growing the tomato in a really sunny window. It may just not produce that many tomatoes, but I think you would get a few. And as you can see, tomato plants can get really big, so you want to ensure that they have enough space. So the tomatoes in this greenhouse, they're planted fairly densely and they're all about a foot apart on each side. That gives you an idea of spacing. And of course, if you're going to grow your tomatoes in a pot, you probably want to have one tomato per pot, unless you have a really big container. I think they'd be happier having the whole pot to themselves. Another consideration with container gardening or gardening in pots is that you may need to increase the size of your container as your plant grows. You can see this plant is very large, and so it needs a large root space to support itself below ground as well. Another consideration when growing your tomato plants is not allowing them to flower too early. So here's a tomato plant that I have in a small pot. This will be ready to go into a larger pot very soon. And so if this plant began producing flowers, and the fruit, the tomato itself, comes from the flowers, it won't be able to grow big and tall and strong so that it can bear more fruit. Like, it may just produce a few fruits and then die because it feels its life cycle is completed. Whereas if you pull the flowers when they're small, when the plant is small, and allow it to reach a larger size before you allow it to flower and fruit, then it has more strength, it's larger, it can hold and support more fruit, and so you're going to end up with more tomatoes to eat. Another tip for getting as many tomatoes as possible from your tomato plant is good pruning practices. You want to prune the bottom leaves from your plants and begin pruning them up to where the first fruits are. Because those bottom leaves, as the plant grows, the bottom leaves are becoming shaded out, so they're not actually contributing as much energy to the plant in terms of harnessing energy from the sun, and they're going to kind of congest the space and prevent airflow. Tomatoes really like airflow. So we want to clear out the bottom branches or the bottom leaves that aren't bearing fruit, and that's going to help your tomato plant focus on producing your actual tomato. How do you know when your tomato is ready to eat? Well, the varieties that I handed out at market, we are not sure what they are for most people. So your tomato might be ripe when it's red, when it's pink, when it's yellow, when it's purple, when it's orange. There's lots of different colors of tomatoes, but they are not ripe when they're green, and also hard. So if you're not quite sure the color of your tomato and it's looking kind of yellow, and you're not sure if it's going to turn red, you can just go ahead and give it a really gentle squeeze, and if it's starting to feel soft, then it's probably ready to pick. And the last tip I'll give about tomatoes before we head out to see our peppers is that tomatoes really don't like to be too moist. We have something called tomato blight in our region, which can be attributed to tomato plants being too wet or too moist. So whenever you water your plants, make sure to water just the soil, just the ground. You don't need to spray the entire plant with water. Just go ahead and water the soil. You might be thinking, I cannot control the rain, and the rain gets the entire plant wet. And this is very true, and this is why blight can be a problem in our region, because we have really wet summers. This is actually why we built our hoop house, is to house our tomatoes so that they don't get rained on and are less susceptible to blight. But you cannot control the rain, this is very true. If you had a greenhouse set up, that would be a great space to grow tomatoes, but just to minimize the amount of moisture that your leaves are being exposed to, you can take responsibility for watering just the soil when you can. And now we have our pepper plants. So our peppers are planted outside in the ground. We have these spaced just about a little over a foot apart. Again, if you're growing in a container, you probably just want to have one pepper plant per container, so that that plant has enough nutrients and space to grow and flourish. Here's an example of a pepper I have growing in a pot. Just to give you a visual, I would not grow more than one pepper in a pot this size. This pepper plant has lots of flowers, and it's getting ready to fruit, and that's really exciting. This pepper plant feels like a really good size for that. This pepper next to it, this was planted a little bit later, and you can see it's still fairly small, just like I was talking about with the young tomato. I think I'm going to go ahead and pull some of these flowers off, and I'm just pinching off the flower, just like that, and that will encourage the pepper plant to grow larger and to put more energy towards having really strong stems and branches. Peppers are another plant that really like full sun. With peppers, it can be a little bit trickier to tell when they're ripe because they don't change in texture like the tomatoes, going from hard to soft. Really, it's just about size, and it's about the color of your variety. If you don't know what variety peppers you have, like you participated in the mystery of our peppers at market on Friday, you can just experiment. If your peppers are feeling green for a really long time and then they're starting to rot, it's probably ready to pick when it's green. If your peppers are green for a while and then they start to magically change red just a little bit, then they're probably ripe when they're red. But you can also eat any bell pepper or sweet pepper when it's green. You don't necessarily have to wait until it changes color. Check it out, we got little jalapenos coming in. As with most plants, your peppers and your tomatoes, they want to be kept watered regularly, but they don't want to be soaking wet. If you stick your finger in the soil in the pot or in the soil in the ground where they're growing and it feels like squishy and you can feel the water on your finger, like it squishes up and there's water there, that's probably a little bit too wet, but you want to feel that it's moist and it's not really powdery or dusty or dry. Another really helpful tip is to be patient, especially with your peppers. I find that peppers can take a little while to ripen in certain climates and in certain gardens and certain soil types. So be patient with your plants, spend time with them, notice what's going on, and have fun gardening. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can email me. My email's in the description of this video. I would love to hear about your gardening journey and offer any tips that I can.